Welcome to the guide, Exile. If you're watching this build guide after patch 3.5, Betrayal League, be sure to check the description, written guide, and pinned comments for updates on the build for its current viability. Some items, mechanics, or skill selections may change in between patches, thus the build can differ from the video. Are you ready to deliver some fat boom booms to big boy bosses? Well, you've come to the right place, my good sirs, or ma'am. Here we have a Pathfinder that is utilizing the recently buffed Voidfletcher quiver, along with the also recently buffed Aborix. This quiver's built-in Void Shot skill allows us to pull out some really powerful burst damage and scale it quite high with the right itemization. So let's take a look at how the skill works. Void Shot is triggered whenever you fire an arrow, as long as you have one Void Charge. Void Charges are gained every 0.5 seconds with this quiver, and you can have a maximum of 5 Void Charges at a time. Void Shot uses your bow's base damage at 120% base value and converts 50% of physical damage to cold. Once the Void Shot is fired, it will travel to the target location and after a short period explode in an area of effect, dealing damage with 100% more multiplier to its original base damage. So now that we know a couple things about the Void Shot, how do we scale it? Well, we have a couple of points to address. The Void Charge generation is capped at 0.5 seconds per charge. Scaling attack speed is not the best way to scale the Void Shot's damage per second. Due to the hard cap by charge generation, at most we would ultimately want to be attacking with our main skill every 0.5 seconds to avoid having any charges off cooldown. It cannot be supported with skill gems. This means that we will have to scale our base damage, generic multipliers such as critical strike multiplier, and sheer number of projectiles. Remember that this projectile is an area of effect, thus explosions can overlap. The skill is 50% conversion of physical to cold damage. Here we might as well complete the conversion from a physical base and scale some elemental damage and elemental penetration. With those finer points of knowledge, there are also some other interesting interactions with this skill. The wording of a Void Shot is fired every time you fire an arrow is important. This means that we can use a skill like Barrage, which fires multiple arrows in successions to trigger all of our Void Shots at once. This does go against the point of having a balanced attack speed, but allows us to dump all of our damage on a single target at once, leading to some juicy boom booms. So with this Pathfinder using the Aborix and Dying Sun, we can consistently fire 5 Void Shot projectiles per arrow fired for a total of 25 Void Shot projectiles per barrage trigger. And let me tell you, the boom of those 25 Void Shots is orgasmic. So to explore these boom booms further, let's get into the build summary. As with the Disintegrator Slayer before this build, it is quite expensive at its current gearing. However, unlike the Disintegrator Slayer, we do not require Elder or Shaper base items in every slot and can be surely started on a couple Exalt budget, making use of the Aborix, Voidfletcher, 2 5 links, and some various rare gear to fill in the rest. At my current investment, I have around 25 Exalts worth of gear, and a good portion of that has been reused from prior builds. So if you've been following the gearing of those, this will be much cheaper. However, even without this expensive gear, the Voidfletcher's Void Shots will carry massive amounts of damage. Offensively, we have the following. Void Shot from the Voidfletcher. As we have already discussed, this skill deals massive amounts of damage and can be scaled quite high with the use of barrage and extra projectiles. The quiver alone packs quite a punch for your offensive damage. A barrage and a clearing skill of choice. For single target, we use a close-range barrage to not only proc Void Shot dumps, but to deal damage itself. Barrage used to be the king of single target for many years, and is still quite good, but made so much better by this quiver. For map clearing, I chose to use Ice Shot, as it not only fits the cold style, but hits hard and has great coverage with Chain. Since we are doing full cold conversion with elemental scaling, you can certainly use any other skill that you would like here, such as Tornado Shot, Shrapnel Shot, Lightning Arrow, Rain of Arrows, and many more. Flasks. As we are Pathfinder, we get to have our flasks up at almost all times, along with them being even more powerful than usual. Critical strikes and elemental conversion. Since we're on the right side of the tree, one of the best ways to improve our damage is to go with critical strikes. Along with this, we can also convert the rest of our physical damage to cold and gain further scaling from the nearby elemental damage and penetration nodes. Since we are full cold conversion, an excellent offensive choice is Frostbomb for stripping of enemy cold resistance. As with the Winter Orb Inquisitor, I also chose to use a Cold Snap on cast when damage taken to apply a Ground Chill with Unbound Ailments and Bone Chill to make our enemies take increased cold damage based on the effectiveness of our chill on them. In our case, we gain close to 20% more damage from this. Defensively, we have the following. Acrobatics and Phase Acrobatics. As we are on the right side of the tree, a basic requirement for our defenses is to get all the dodge that we can. Here we can get a total of 40% attack dodge and 30% spell dodge as a base. Flasks. Again, we are a Pathfinder, so we can rely on our buffed Flasks for defense. I chose to use a Taste of Hate and Dying Sun for their offensive and defensive reductions. The Taste of Hate is great not only for the cold damage reductions, but the physical damage reductions as well. Chill and Freeze. Since we are full cold conversion, we are able to chill and freeze enemies completely, not only rendering them powerless, but their bodies will shatter on death. Maim and Blind. I was able to get Maim in the build due to my double socket Tomb Fist, slowing enemies even further from their chilled states if they were not already frozen. Blind is achievable through an Abyss Jewel, and makes up for our loss of evasion with the Iron Reflex rotating buff that occurs on Aborix. Movement Speed. Finally, we have mechanical dodging through our quick movement speed via our buffed Quicksilver Flask and Blink Arrow. The playstyle of this build is very enjoyable, fast, and rewarding. For mapping, you will just want to engage Blood Rage, as is tradition on attack-based builds, activate all your Flasks, move up to enemies and blast them with Ice Shot and Void Shots. Move on to the next pack and just repeat. For bosses, there are a couple things you'll want to do. First, you'll want to put down your Frost Bomb, and in optional, you can attack the boss with your clearing skill to maintain Mirage Archer's damage. You'll then want to activate your Flasks and get up nice and cozy to the boss to release your Barrage to dump all of your Void Shots on them. Then you will want to move around telegraphed attacks, moving back in to unleash another barrage of Void Shots once they have recovered. You can also just face tank bosses depending on your comfortability with it, ignoring the full Void Shot dump, relying on the barrage damage and using them as they come back. The path of building Paceman is included within the written script and description. I chose to go with the Pathfinder for my Ascendancy, as I wanted to have reliable Flask uptime, as the Dying Sun is quite a large part of the Void Shot's damage scaling. The Flask reliability and buffs are also great for generic mapping and bossing, as we will always have Flasks rolling. Ultimately, the Ascendancy choice was more for utility rather than the best damage. The style of the build can truly be made on many different Ascendancies, such as Juggernaut, Berserker, Champion, Slayer, Raider, Deadeye, or even the Scion's Ascendant, to name a few. It really comes down to what would be most enjoyable for you. Veteran Bowyer. This is one of the best nodes for maintaining Flask charges during mapping, as we are almost always gaining 100% increased Flask charges from enemies. Along with Flask maintenance, we gain 10% of physical damage as a random element, and 10% elemental penetration. Nature's Boon. A nice reduction in elemental damage taken, 3 Flask charges gained every 3 seconds for prolonged fights, and 20% chance for you not to consume any Flask charges. Master Alchemist. An excellent node as we no longer have to concern ourselves with elemental ailments such as Freeze, Shock, and Ignite. We also garner a small 40% increased elemental damage. Nature's Adrenaline. This node is great for the attack and movement speed bump. Here is the Ascendancy progression. Here is the final passive tree. We get the following keystones in the tree: Acrobatics and Phase Acrobatics. As mentioned before, these are very strong nodes to help us dodge at 40% of incoming attack damage and 30% of spell damage, at the cost of 4 skill points. Point Blank. As we want to get up close for Barrage, there aren't many better scalers for this, and Void Shot itself will benefit from this. As for the rest of the tree, we look to get as much life as we can, critical strike scaling, elemental scaling, and of course, Flask nodes where we can get them. For bandits, you'll want to help Alira. For major pantheons, I chose Soul of the Brine King to help us avoid chain stuns, as we don't have any major stun avoidance or any immunity. For minors, you can make use of any of them depending on your situation. Here are the gem links for the build, in order of importance. This is my clearing setup for maps that I found to work best. The Ice Shot and Chain pairing really cleans up nicely. For the 6th link, I chose to toss in a faster attacks just to speed up my shooting animations, thus increasing my clearing speed since I was generally one-shotting most packs. I also trigger Mirage Archer on bosses during the Void Shot recharge to provide further damage. This is our bossing skill of choice to trigger all of our Void Shots at once. Since I wanted to use our clearing skill to also support us on bosses, I chose to not use Mirage Archer on this link setup. This is just to improve our damage further. If you feel you have enough damage, you can always swap Unbound Ailments for Immortal Call, or completely drop the setup for an Immortal Call increased duration, and possibly Curse setup if you'd like. Since I have a 2-socket Tomb Fist, I chose to put my remaining auras in this link setup. If you have a 3-socket pair or rare gloves, you could put your Blink Arrow in here with a faster attacks, and move some of your skills around. For gearing this build, you'll definitely want to have the Arborix and Voidfletcher ready to go, as they make up the base of your damage. Other than that, the rest of the gear can be basic rares and eventually work up to the gearing I showcase here. For the helmet, much like the Shattering Steel Deadeye, I chose to fossil craft one for the percentage increase maximum life hybrid, and nearby enemies have -9 cold resistance. This is crafted via pristine and frigid fossils. I was able to get this helmet within about 5 tries, and it doesn't have anything too special on it. Since I was crafting my own helmet, I also figured it would be worth getting the Barrage enchantment on it, but this is not required by any means. You could also look to get a Hail Negator for the build for its great instantaneous life recovery, as we end up with around 7 Abyss Jewels. Well, this bad boy probably looks familiar. I've used this chest in the last 2 builds I have made, and for good reason. It gives a lot of life and base critical strike chance. This is overall a great option for the build to make sure we get a good life pool while gaining some offensive stats at the same time. If you do not have a similar chest or are not able to craft one, you can certainly use a Belly of the Beast, Lore Weave, Shroud of the Lightless, or a Hyres Ire for maximum damage potential. Since I already had the 2-socket Tomb Fists, I chose to use them here for their excellent damage potential. Fear not, 2 sockets are not required, and a single socket will work just fine. If you cannot get those, you can always start off with some rare gloves. Rare boots are the choice here for life, movement speed, and resistances. The best belt base we can get here is a Stygian for the extra utility and damage of the socketed Abyss Jewel. This, of course, can get pretty powerful with the right fossil crafts, as well for elemental damage, cold damage, and elemental damage with attacks all stacked together. Here I have just gone with life resistances, a flask mod, and elemental damage with attacks. A strong amulet for this build would be the Pandemonious, but I found it to be very restrictive gearing around, as it had no intelligence on it, as we were starved for that, and it did not have any life either. So I chose to go for a Shaper amulet with percentage of physical damage gained as extra cold damage and elemental damage penetration. Overall, I got slightly worse damage than the Pandemonious, but much better life and attribute balance. For the rings, I chose to use a Mark of the Elder in this build setup for the flat physical damage, flat cold, and percentage increased attack damage. Due to this, my other ring had to be a Shaper ring. Since we needed a bit of accuracy, I found a decent Shaper ring with accuracy, life, flat physical damage, and resistances. A pretty good score. My weapon of choice is the Arborix, as it was recently buffed and is quite strong for this build. For starters, it has the +2 arrows to bow attacks, and it will add to the Void Shot's projectile count. The only other bow that can do this is a Death's Harp or Opus. A Death's Opus is similar damage if we get a perfectly rolled one and don't already have quite a bit of critical strike multiplier, but we have not considered the other buffs, the Arborix. The Arborix has a 16-second rotational buff, where in 8 seconds of that timer you will have 30% increased attack and movement speed, and the other 8 seconds you will have Iron Reflexes, with a 30% more bow damage at close range. Since we are already at close range, this is another juicy multiplier when it is up. You can also get Iron Reflexes in the tree for 3 points, and always have this buff up. So overall, I chose the Arborix for these rotational buffs to bring it ahead of the Opus. However, you can certainly start or use an Opus if you would rather. Finally, the quiver that the build is made around. It of course provides the Void Shot skill that makes our Boom Boom, and deletes most all enemies with 1 dump. I was able to score this one with a percentage of physical damage gained as extra cold damage, which is a nice damage bump as well. However, a regular quiver would work too, but it could mess up your initial chain and packs if you choose to use chain due to the arrows penetrate an additional target. There are a slew of flask choices for this build as we are the Pathfinder, but unfortunately we only have 5 flask slots. Drat. As we are critical strike based, a diamond flask is always a choice for us. A quicksilver flask, since we are Pathfinder, we can get this bad boy with increased flask effect and movement speed affixes to maintain its uptime with ease. This flask alone grants about 100% movement speed. A dying sun, and this is of course a big damage bump for the 2 extra projectiles and some fire damage reductions. A taste of hate. I chose the Taste of Hate for its offensive and defensive capabilities. It reduces incoming cold and physical damage, as well as granting us around 20% of physical damage as extra cold damage. You could also use an Atziri's Promise here instead if you could not get a Taste of Hate. And finally, the required Life Flask for panic healing and bleed removal. I will show example jewels used in my build within the video, and leave the affix priority in the written guide. I use a Watcher's Eye with percentage of physical damage converted to cold damage while affected by hatred. This jewel cost me around 60 chaos at the time and helps me convert the rest of my physical damage from barrage into cold. If you cannot get this jewel, it is not the end of the world, since their conversion from the tree will fully cover Ice Shot and Void Shot. I also use a Lionized Vision in the projectile damage jewel socket above acrobatics to gain the claw damage and leech nodes for bow attacks. This is a very valuable jewel to the build and somewhat required. If you cannot get this jewel, you can always spec into the Life Leech Blow Duelist. I did not choose to use any rare jewels in this build and only opted for Abyss Jewels due to their flat damage, life, and utility. On Abyss Jewels, you will of course want to try and find Blind and Onslaught if you can, to help out for mapping and for your defenses. For more information on leveling, check out the written guide. Well, this build came together quite quickly, and crushed the entire game effortlessly with its massive boom booms. I generally do not enjoy generic front-end damage bow builds all that much, but this one was certainly a lot of fun considering the mechanics we get to play around with. I was also very pleased with its endgame viability and ability to clear all the content I put it at with ease, even doing an Uber Elder run a day prior to finishing the build. So if you're looking for some big boom booms in a zoomy build, look no further. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, Exile.